Okay, in this last module in Chapter 4, States of Consciousness, we're going to talk about psychoactive drugs. Now, they fall into two categories. There are drugs that are used for medicinal purposes. We call that controlled substances. So this is like you have surgery and are prescribed strong painkillers to help you to cope with the pain you have after surgery, for instance. So those are called psychoactive drugs because they are altering your consciousness. They allow you to sleep so that your body can heal, for instance. The other one that we want to talk about, though, is the illegal drugs, such as LSD, cocaine, crack, etc., that alter our mood, alter our ability to reason, alter our consciousness in significant ways. And we're going to look at that in more depth in a bit. We're also going to look at some of the legal substances which still have some lethal effects. For instance, alcohol. Alcohol in small quantities, not too bad. But when you are regularly consuming alcohol in large quantities, it can have significant social, psychological, and physical impacts on your body. So we're going to talk about that at length in this particular module. So let's look at how it alters our consciousness. How does taking a drug alter our consciousness? Well, the first thing that it does, it can alter our mood, our perception of reality, or thought patterns, depending on the type of drug, the nature of the drug that you're taking, and whether it is an illegal substance, for instance, such as LSD, how it can make you have a different perception of reality than a person who is not taking the drug. And I want to talk about two types of dependence that we develop on drugs. The first one, physical dependence, occurs because we have this natural ability. Our body will adapt to whatever we're taking. So a person who takes alcohol, for instance, as a means of relaxing themselves, calming themselves, or dealing with the stress that they may have in their life, they may find that at first they just need a couple of drinks to get that feeling of relaxation. But as their body develops a tolerance, they need more and more to have that same feeling, and they need it more often. So they have this physical dependence that develops as a result of our body modifying, or our body and our brain modifying our reaction to the substance that we're ingesting. But then there's the psychological dependence. That's the harder one to deal with or to alleviate. If it was just a physical dependence, we probably could work something out. We could probably help people who have addiction issues a lot better than what we can. Addiction is a very difficult illness to treat in many cases, simply because the psychological dependency becomes more stronger. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the other reason why people may become more and more dependent on a particular drug substance is because they don't like the withdrawal symptoms that they may feel. They don't like what happens to them when they don't have it. So let's talk about a person who smokes, for instance. They decide to quit smoking, and what goes through their day-to-day habits. Some of you may have had a smoking addiction at some point and have quit. Or some of you may have tried to quit but found it too challenging. And that's because the withdrawal symptoms are unpleasant, or in some cases quite challenging to deal with. painful. So for instance, a person who withdraws from smoking, decides that they want to quit, may have mood alterations. They may become angry and hostile. They may become snappy. They may be difficult to be around. For instance, let's say one of your parents or your friends decide to quit smoking, and you're around them and you feel like, oh, I can't stand being near this person because he or she snaps the littlest thing. Or the person may feel like they substitute it with eating lots of food, and so they get angry at themselves that they're eating too much and gaining weight. And so this withdrawal symptoms aren't giving them the same pleasure as the actual cigarette, and so they may end up going back to smoking. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are drugs that are illegal, but drugs that are used for medicinal purposes, such as chronic disease or chronic illness, are referred to as controlled substances. Your doctor prescribes the correct dose for your arthritis, let's say. It's an arthritis pain issue, or it's diabetes, how much insulin you should be having for your diabetes. It's controlled by a medical professional, and you know how much you're ingesting. You're taking a safe amount that's going to control the symptoms of your particular disease or disorder. Whereas illegal drugs, there's no control over that, in the sense that you decide to buy drugs from somebody on the street and you can consume it all at once, or you can consume it over several days, or whatever the case may be. It's not controlled by any governing body. Now, you might say, well, marijuana is one of those drugs that is going to become a controlled substance. And yes, it will get delisted as a criminal offense, which in some cases may be a good thing. But as we'll see a little bit later when we talk about that particular substance, there are some negative side effects of ingesting marijuana. So, which is worse, the psychological or the physical? Well, as I mentioned before, in terms of treatment modalities, it's a lot easier to treat someone who has just a physical dependence on drugs. We can find out why that physical dependence is. So for instance, say somebody started taking drugs because they had a motor vehicle accident, so they had a lot of pain, and so they took strong medications to deal with that pain, and then became addicted to that substance because they found that it wasn't helping their pain to take just one pill, so they took two. That's okay, but it's usually not that simple. It's usually mixed up with this craving, this desire, this association that we learn to make with some kind of positive feeling. That's what causes that craving, that urge. That we associate this drug with good times with friends, for instance, or we associate this substance with a reduction of pain. And so that there's this craving that we have, that we think that this is the only way that we can get that good feeling, or this is the only way that we can get that reduction of pain, that this is the only way we can do that. And so that craving, that urge, becomes a strong motivation to continue taking drugs. So what are some of the risk factors? So who is likely to become addicted to drugs? How do we know what is the addictive potential of a particular drug? And there are 4 factors that I want to discuss in this particular slide. But by no means is this exhaustive, because there are other issues, social issues, that may affect addiction to a particular substance, how our body learns to tolerate these things, and so forth. I want you to look at page 112, table 4.2 in your text. It gives a number of different factors that include peer influences, educational variables, social variables, family variables, environmental variables, and psychological behavioral variables. And now it's interesting because these look at no more than just the drug itself and how it alters your mood. It looks at the environmental cues that persuade you to take the drug in the first place. And remember, when we're talking about drugs, we're talking about alcohol and nicotine as well. So the factors I want to talk about, I'm just putting all the points up here. How quickly do we feel the effects of the drug? So for instance, if you feel it immediately, that's great. You probably won't need to take any more. So maybe, let's say that glass of wine you have at the end of the day because you've had a long day, it was tiring, and you just want to unwind and relax. And that one glass of wine does it for you. That's great. But the problem is, for some people, they're not going to feel the effects that quickly because they've already had a habit of taking wine every day of the week, for instance. And every day of the week they have 3 or 4 or 5 glasses. The second is, how much pleasure does a person get from taking that particular substance or drug? And again, if it's something that's intensely pleasurable or that you associate with good things, you're more likely to take that particular drug. One in particular that I want to talk about here is ecstasy. I'll talk about it a bit more a little bit later. But people who take ecstasy indicate that they feel this sense of connection to loved ones. And so that's a pleasurable feeling. It helps them to bond with their significant other, and maybe it enhances their sexual behavior, if you will. So they want that pleasurable effect. They want to keep taking it for that particular reason. The third one is, how long does that pleasurable effect last? And in some cases, some drugs, it doesn't last very long at all. So you're motivated to take another one to get that same pleasurable feeling back again. With some drugs, it lasts longer. And so the person is able to just say, okay, this is enough, and I won't take any more, and I won't become dependent on this particular substance. The other issue, of course, is, how do you feel afterwards? How much discomfort do you feel? So for instance, someone who is an alcoholic may say that they never feel hangovers. Why? Because they don't allow themselves to get to that point. They remember what a hangover was like, and they decide that instead of getting to that stage, just keep drinking. And this may be very counterproductive for that person. Obviously, they are harming their body by taking more and more alcohol, but they also don't like that memory of what kind of discomfort they may have felt afterwards, and so they are motivated to continue taking the drug to avoid the discomfort feeling. So in a sense, it's an avoidance kind of learning. It's like, I've learned that this is a result of doing this, so I will take this substance in order to not get to that point. So let's talk about different categories of psychoactive drugs. And the first one I want to talk about is the stimulants. Stimulants are really useful. They help us to speed up our central nervous system and help us to feel more alert and energetic. There's a but here, and that is in small doses. And let's talk about one that seems pretty harmless, caffeine. We all have our morning coffees. Maybe not all of you, maybe some of you are tea people instead, but there is that desire to, or belief that coffee is going to give me enough energy to get on with my day. So I have to have my morning coffee. And I'll confess, I'm one of those. I have to have my morning coffee. I feel that if I don't, I feel tired and I feel it's hard to get on with my day. But what happens if you drink a lot of coffee? And I knew someone that I used to work with who would constantly have a cup of coffee in his hands. He must have had 10, 15 coffees in a day. And we're not talking like little tiny cups that, little dainty cups that your grandmother may have in her cupboard. We're talking about big mugfuls of coffee that he would have, like I said, 10 times a day at least. Because God knows how many he had before he came to work and after he left. But he was always hyper. He was one of the most hyper people I met. He just seemed constantly on edge. I like this cartoon for that very reason. This person is starting to develop tremors as a result of too much coffee. It's widely used, and we think that, it's not such a bad thing. It lifts our mood, but after having too much of it, it's going to have a negative impact on sleep. I don't know if anybody here has ever had cups of coffee late at night, and they find themselves tossing and turning at bed. And it's true. It's not conducive to helping us sleep. Nicotine. Nicotine, on the other hand, is a very deadly poison. We develop a tolerance for nicotine almost immediately, that first cigarette. If you contrast it to drugs like heroin or cocaine, that it takes weeks to get addicted, nicotine, you're addicted almost immediately. And why is that? It's usually because it has more than just the nicotine. It has lots of other ingredients that can cause this particular reaction. And it's become a less fashionable thing to be a smoker in our society. People are trying to quit, and the message seems to be getting out there. But it still causes a lot of death. 5 times the number of deaths than are caused by things like car accidents, suicides, drug abuse, murder. So it's a major health problem, and we're going to look at this more in depth a little bit later in the semester when we get to health and stress. Because face it, a lot of people say that cigarette helps them to calm down after they feel stress or feel anxiety. But actually it's a stimulant. It's perking up your central nervous system and giving you energy. Amphetamines. Amphetamines are a class of stimulants. They increase our arousal, relieve our fatigue. They've been used effectively for ADHD and for narcolepsy, but some people take them for other reasons. So for instance, you have to pull an all-nighter to study and you're afraid that you're going to fall asleep, so you think, okay, if I take some amphetamines, I'll feel energetic enough to study and get through this. Truck drivers sometimes take a significant amount of amphetamines because they want to be able to be on the road as long as possible, to maximize their earning potential as they drive. But what happens to a person if they take high doses of amphetamines? Well, if you take a high dose, more than 100 milligrams, you can become confused, disoriented, you can become suspicious, delusional, hallucinate. So it's quite severe, the reactions that people can have. Now, they don't all have, but it does happen. And if you think about sort of the opposite, when you withdraw from amphetamines, you fall asleep for days at a time. A person could sleep for 10 to 15 hours or more, depending on how much amphetamine they have. Now, cocaine comes in 2 forms. Cocaine comes as crack that people smoke, or as powder that people snort. Which one do you think is worse? Well, the smoked form, the crack type, is the cheaper version of it, but it's also the worst in terms of the addictive potential of it. So there's this intense euphoria that takes but it doesn't last. It doesn't last very long at all. So a person taking crack is going to want to take more. If it only lasts for 15 to 20 minutes or less, 5 to 10 minutes, then they're motivated to take some more, to have that sense of euphoria, and therefore the addiction starts. And what happens with cocaine is it's targeting the brain in our pleasure centers. If you remember correctly, that we talked about dopamine in the second chapter when we talked about biology and behavior. Dopamine is associated with rewards. And so taking cocaine is binding right to those reward systems. I'm going to post a video called Mouse Party, and you'll see the effects of different substances on different mice in this party. It's amusing and entertaining, but it's also educational in the sense of seeing how severe a reaction an individual can have. And in case you're thinking, well, mice would react a lot differently than people, we give mice smaller doses, obviously, but people don't take small doses, they take larger doses and have the same reactions. And it's been interesting to look at mice and cocaine, because what they found is that animals who have become addicted because of human intervention, unfortunately, prefer cocaine, but they lose interest in everything else. They don't care about food, they don't care about water, they don't care about sex. Nothing is important to them except for that cocaine. And so in this case, withdrawal is not so much a physical thing as it is a psychological thing. They'll do anything to get that pleasurable experience, as would some addicts. So what's in severe doses of cocaine, what can happen? Well, your heart can be sped up, your pulse, your respiration, everything gets sped up. You could have seizures. You could have palpitations, and in severe case, obviously a person can die. The good news is that it's not high use in Canada, but cocaine, unfortunately, crack cocaine certainly is in higher use.